The Hangar Z podcast welcomes Dave Wuertz, peer support manager of PHI Air Medical.
But let me turn it back to mental health for a second there, because there's a tender trap in that. Because we love the dopamine hit that we get from these things. We are all, it's probably a terrible way to put it, but we're all adrenaline junkies when it comes to that sort of thing. We wouldn't be sitting here if we weren't. But I think sometimes that becomes too much our happy place. I know it did for me, where a few years ago, well, a number of years ago, the only time I felt like I had any control over my life was I was sitting in a helicopter 2,000 feet in the air with somebody trying to actively die on me. I could control that. And that's what kind of pushed me to getting my own journey of getting back to normal.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and partnered with Vertical Valor Plus. Today's episode is a powerful and deeply human conversation centered on service, trust, and taking care of one another in some of the most demanding environments imaginable. Our guest is Dave Wuertz, manager of peer support for PHI Air Medical. Dave's story is one shaped by a lifetime of service in the medical field, starting with an EMT class in college and influenced even earlier by his father's volunteer work on an ambulance. From those early experiences, Dave went on to become a paramedic, a trainer, and eventually an air medical flight nurse. Along the way, he also became a founding member of the peer support program at PHI Air Medical, helping build a culture that recognizes mental wellness as mission critical. In this episode, we dive into why peer support matters so much in public service, especially in air medical, why proactive peer support is far more effective than reactive approaches, and why trust is the cornerstone of any successful program. Dave shares impactful incidents from his time as an air medical flight crew member and from his work supporting others, offering real-world perspective on what these crews face every day. We also discuss the mindset of 4 to go, 1 to say no, and how speaking up can make the difference between a safe mission and a tragic outcome. You'll also hear an overview of PHI Air Medical's nationwide footprint and the scale of responsibility carried by its teams across the country. And as a special connection for longtime listeners, we talk about Dave's long-standing professional relationship with one of our favorite guests, Dr. Tanya Glenn, and how that collaboration reinforces the importance of mental wellness training done right. This is an honest, meaningful conversation about caring for the caregivers, and one you won't want to miss. Thank you to all of our sponsors and our loyal listeners. Please take a minute to like, share, and subscribe to the Hangar Z podcast. Thank you to our sponsors, Rotorcraft Support, Technosonic Industries Limited, and Tracka Systems.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like they're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, threw the shotgun, threw something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and partnered with Vertical Valor Plus. I'm your host, Jack Shanley. With me today is the creator of the Hangar Z podcast, John Gray. John, hello.
Good morning, sir. Really happy to be here, coming to you on the heels of the Blades of Valor tour, which was absolutely amazing.
Yes.
Such a good tour, and just excited for what we got there, and really excited for today's conversation. What we're going to talk about today has become a focal point for a lot of our conversations, so really excited for today.
Yeah. Have you recovered from Blades of Valor? You rested up?
No.
No, me neither. It was a long 2 weeks, but absolutely incredible hospitality from all the agencies we went to, and the content that we all got, particularly Brent Bundy and Scott Kellerman with their video and photography. Unbelievable. So stay tuned, everybody. That's going to be a lot of great stuff coming out of that. And John touched on it. We're going to continue a theme that is important to John and I, and it's mental wellness. This kind of continues the conversations we've had with numerous guests. And today's guest has been involved in the air medical industry for a long time and is heavily involved with peer support and the mental wellness side of this industry. So we're going to welcome Dave Wuertz. Dave Wuertz is with PHI Air Medical. Dave, welcome to the Hangar Z podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're thrilled to have you. You came highly recommended by one of our favorite guests, Dave. You know who that is.
I do.
It's Dr. Tanya Glenn.
Yeah.
I was just chatting with Tanya and your name came up and I said, tell me more. And here we are, Dave. She didn't have to twist my arm at all when she told me about you.
Tanya and I may have a story or two about each other. We've known each other.
I understand you do.
35-ish years.
Wow. That's a long time. And so you're both in good company. And I will tell you that when you sent your resume and your bio to me, it was so lengthy in the amount of things you have done. It actually confused me at times. I mean, it was that amazing where it was great. I mean, you've done a lot, and we're going to go through your life of service here. What you have many years in that, but let's talk first. Let's talk first about your current position as a peer support manager for PHI. Tell us about that position.
Like you said, I've been with PHI a minute, coming up on 25 years. All of that time until about 4.5 years ago, I was a clinician in Central Texas and a base supervisor. I have to be careful how I word this one, but I'm a paramedic with a nursing license, which I guess is the best way to describe my approach to care. Been a medic since '76, and go back honestly to the Johnny and Roy days of how EMS got started. So fast forward to getting on the peer support team with PHI, we had a near miss aviation event in the South Texas area back in 2009. IMC that literally by the grace of God got pulled out at the last minute. And the crew and pilot were not okay afterwards. They understood what could have happened. And frankly, we didn't, and I wasn't involved in this. This is the story that I'm told, but it's the genesis of how we got a peer support team. We were fortunate enough to be in Texas. And as you already mentioned, Tanya Glenn is in Texas, and she specializes in us. She gets pre-hospital care, law enforcement, firefighting, like nobody else that I've ever met does who didn't grow up in it. So we sent our folks to her. They got help, and then we realized this is going to happen again. Something's going to happen again, and we need to build a team. And Tanya, unique to her practice, and this is not, I'm not trying to sell Tanya's services, but unique to her practice, she builds peer support teams and then supports them. And we'll get into kind of how our process works maybe later. But the point is that then about 2 years later, we established a peer support team in 2011. I'm one of the original members. And we've been growing it ever since. Started with, 16 or so people. We have 45 today on it. One of the things that we have that is maybe a little different, we have every discipline in the organization, or every general discipline in the organization represented. So for instance, you all you're a pilot, right, Jack?
Yes, we're both former pilots.
You don't want to talk to some medic or nurse about an aviation incident. You want somebody who sat there and understands what went on in your head, in your heart, pulling it out before people got hurt. So we have pilots, nurses, medics, mechanics, people from our billing operation, from our comm center, all on the team. And what we try to do is to marry them up with people with a similar background when an event occurs. And then and we'll walk through how that looks a little
Sure.
bit. So anyway,
Sounds good.
about 4 years ago, I took this new job, and I had pitched it to PHI mostly, frankly, out of selfishness, because I was looking at something, looking to do something different than the clinical side of things. And our peer support team had grown to a level that was robust, but we weren't really able to be proactive because it was all volunteer help. There was no one really kind of shepherding it day to day. So I threw together a job description and pitched it to one of the senior leaders who was over the peer support team. And then COVID happened, and we waited 2 years. And um, and then about 4 years ago, I took over this job. So I'm kind of a unicorn for PHI because I'm allegedly this is a part-time job. I won't tell you how many hours I've already put in this week. And I don't need insurance because I'm an old guy and the government gives me insurance, and I'm retired twice, maybe 3 times. So it was kind of a unique job for me, and we've been able to grow it from, and I'll give you some numbers as we go through here, but in 22, when we started with what amounts to full-time oversight of the team, we had 77 interactions. Last year, we closed out with 643 interactions.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And there's some reasons for that. It isn't because I'm great. It's because we started doing some proactive things that we simply couldn't do when we were waiting for the phone to ring for somebody to say, I need help. And you all know as well as I do, what do we do in public safety? We are not good at asking for help. And we can pretend that we have destigmatized it as much as we want to pretend, but there's still a stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And people hesitate to pick up the phone and call somebody. So that's why we have horrendous events occur in the public safety community. You don't have to be in this business for very long to know of or know someone who has hurt themselves. Yeah. You don't have to be in this business very long to know that it leaves a mark. And so what my job is mostly to go out and educate people based on the stuff that Tanya has taught us on why our brains do certain things when we're stressed. And really, once you kind of destigmatize that and let people know you can't fight physiology, your brain's going to do what your brain's going to do. So in our world, like yours, you don't have a choice of that first level of stress, right? You know, when you were a street cop and you were faced with a situation where it was a evolving quick thing, just like when I get out and there's a kid's airway full of blood and gunk that I got to deal with, I don't have the opportunity, nor did you in that, to think, well, wait here. Let's just, I'm not going to do this. So that's where that, the old term suck it up kind of is true, because we do in the public safety community, unique to our jobs, have to get through that first level of what's called acute stress. What we don't do a good job of, and this is where I think peer support really comes in, is, okay, we got through that because we're well trained. You got through it as a police officer by all of your interaction training. I get through it because I spend countless hours with simulators before we do it on human flesh. So that doesn't mean you dealt with the trauma or the stress. It just means you put it aside to do your job. And all three of us, and I see some nodding heads here, because all three of us have had that delayed stress response, right?
Yes.
And all that means is your brain's calmed down enough now that it's time to process. And I think if I have one thing that I would like to get across today is normal. The word normal. That's your brain recovering. And it's asking for the opportunity to process the stress. And I think what we don't encourage our peers and even ourselves sometimes to do is particularly in a busy system. I mean, you had you signed back on and went back in service, and what did you do? You got another 3 calls before you even could think about dealing with that. I got another flight to do. If I was a ground medic, I've got another 15 transports to do. So it's one of those things where you got to understand you didn't deal with it the first time, and now it's time to do it. Now, that may be that you go home and you cut grass, take a walk. Sadly, in our business, sometimes it means people go home and they pound down a 5th of vodka. And or other dangerous behaviors that because they haven't processed stress. So my job mostly is to tell people it's normal and then do some educating. I just got back from Kentucky where I spoke to the leadership team of our folks in Kentucky and then did some training for the bases. And a big part of my job is going out and doing that. And the other big part of my job is triaging the request for interactions. We call an interaction basically 100% of our flights are reviewed. The reason why we went from 77 to 643 in a 3 or 4 year period of time was we added something that we call a comm alert system. And all it is a matrix of questions that is put into the dispatch software. And before the comm spec can close the flight, they have to answer these questions. And I can send it to you so we can use it later. But to see if the flight is such that it would potentially need peer support.
Gotcha.
So I get a text and an email about it. I reach out to the crew and we have a very brief conversation. And in the high 80, 90% of situations, it's like, yeah, it sucked, or yeah, that was sad, but I'm doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we move on. But
that's the triage you're talking about, right?
Right.
That you're responsible for. Gotcha.
And then if it's not, then I have 45 people that I can depend on to assign to that. And then they kind of walk through that situation with that person. Last year, 38 of those people ended up in Dr. Glenn's care.
Wow. That's a great system. Is that, and the fact that PHI has seen to have you manage that, they're taking this very seriously, obviously. Let's talk a little bit, dissect that a little bit more. Give an example of a question or two that's in that post-mission questionnaire.
Thank you to our sponsor, Rotorcraft Support. Rotorcraft Support, from the hangar floor to the flight line. We've spent 40 years caring for the aircraft that communities rely on every day. Rotorcraft Support, where dedication meets decades of experience.
The one that comes to mind is death or injury of a public safety person.
Wow.
So you get dispatched to a police officer down kind of situation. And that would, just by its very nature, I mean, we've all been to those scenes where somebody we know or work with has been hurt really bad. And you know how intense those scenes are. And you get such into a zone that you don't even, sometimes I couldn't even tell you who I talked to on the scene because I'm so focused on taking care of the patient. Then you turn and you go back in service, and somehow your world has to be normal after that. And that's just crazy. It's not.
Because it's not normal.
No, it's not normal. And your brain is going to be on fire for the next 24 hours. And and then what happens in the public safety community? You have to answer 1,700 phone calls from friends who, hey, is Billy Bob okay? What happened out there? Hey, and not that, not that we're gossiping, but people care. It's
Yes.
it's a very, very close community, because we work together every day. And it may be somebody that on the very last call you flew, now you're trying to get out of a car or manage a gunshot wound or something like that. So
Right.
that's one. As you might imagine, kids can be tough.
I figured that was your next one.
Yeah. Kid calls, it's kind of weighted to that. Although we also have a handful of pediatric transport teams that we work with. We either provide the aircraft and the pilot and mechanic for it, and they happen to be a hospital employee. There's a bunch of different models that every agency uses. Or in our case in Arizona, we have our own specialty team transporter. So you can't just say if all you do are pediatric flights, you can't really review every pediatric flight. So
Sure.
we have to kind of negotiate that out as those come in. The other one that may be unique to us in the pre-hospital world, that as law enforcement or and fire probably gets this more than law enforcement, but somebody trapped in a car and you are watching them die by inches, and
Yeah.
and it just takes too long to get them out, or you don't have good access and you can't get them blood, you can't manage their airway, whatever it is. Those are heartbreaking calls.
No doubt.
And so that's one of them. I'm trying to think some of the others. Your partner gets hurt, an aviation event,
Oh yeah.
duck comes through the windshield at 2,000 feet. That'll get your attention.
Yeah.
And probably has. So we try to follow up on those, and then we give our comm specs the liberty to trust the hair on the back of their neck. Because you know as well as I do, having worked the street, that you can tell by the tone of voice of the dispatcher if they've got your back or not.
Right.
And if it's that you got to trust that dispatcher because they know your tone of voice. And they know when you're up to your ears in alligators and when it's just, we're good. So we let them just, hey, if you want to flag it because Dave's voice sounded weird, flag it. It's a phone call. It's not like we've invested a ton of time or money into something, and it's worth just checking in. I think the benefit that we have gotten from this, aside from the mental health, is what it says to the troops of, we really do care about these things, because so many of these, until we instituted this comm alert system, just got by.
Yeah.
And we do it almost in real time. Now, I try to respect, just because I've been there, I try to respect if I get one at, right at shift change, let them get that done, but we do it essentially in real time. Real time meaning within a few hours of the event. Whereas before, it may have been 2 or 3 weeks before it bubbled up to the surface that, hey, did you hear that med so-and-so had this, pediatric cardiac arrest that went sideways, and now we know about it literally within minutes after they land.
It's incredible. Is this common in the industry now, or is this pretty unique to PHI, if you know?
It is. It was actually the brainchild of some of our senior managers from a couple of years ago. We were looking for a way to capture things without people having to make the effort to make a phone call.
Right.
So that's one thing. So we were looking for a way to do that, and there were some technical reasons why it couldn't happen because of the dispatch software we were using. When we changed it, it was like, yeah, now we can do that.
Yeah.
To answer your question directly, there is one other, I think, Boston Med Flight because they were kind enough to share their initial matrix with us.
Mhm.
But I think the only two that I'm aware of are MedFlight from Boston and PHI.
Yeah.
We do, we probably do 22,000 or so flights in a year.
Wow. That's
But that's
incredible.
on 84 bases, so it's not
Right,
like
right. Wow. Well,
um,
I can tell you that one of the things that was hitting me when you were describing this is one of your goals about the caring. I thought about that immediately, but this company cares about their people. And if I was working there, I know that's what I'd feel. Yeah, they're asking me to do this, and yeah, we're busy, and but let me knock that out. I wouldn't hesitate for a second to fill that out because I know what the reason is. The reason is because the people around me and above me and my bosses and the company, they actually care about my mental wellness. And I'm going to do this, for my own good and because it's appreciated. So I felt that in just your description of it. So mission accomplished on that line. John, I see your wheels turning.
Yeah, I just, what comes to mind is how we in public safety aviation learn from the different segments, and that's what I like about the Echo conference is we go on one roof, and what you guys are doing on the helicopter air ambulance side or the HIMS side is something that we should look at applying, just as you're describing this peer support program. It's very easy for us to be like, hey, that's a good idea. We should implement these questions into our dispatch system so that we can proactively then start addressing these situations as you guys have. So I love the proactive approach, and then the cross segment, cross pollination, us learning from each other is, while our missions are different, they're very similar in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So really, really interesting. Love that you guys are proactively going after these situations.
In addition, I guess maybe this would be a good time to kind of talk about how people can access peer support for PHI. Traditionally, what we have had is a toll-free number that is answered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that people can reach out and ask for help. Frankly, when somebody does that, those tend to be probably bigger deals, so to speak. Many times it's a family crisis. Many times it may have something off duty. And what we do is we assist them in finding help at the local level, because Dr. Glenn's practice is not set up to do family counseling. It's only for work-related kinds of things. But what we do is either we help them find help in the area, or the PHI has an EAP program that they subscribe to, and we find counselors. We assist them in getting on that and finding counselors in the area. So that's one way people can get in. Making it a culture change, and really the big deal over the years since we started this was making it part of the culture of the organization, that a supervisor can pick up the phone and say, hey, I got somebody who's really struggling because they're going through a divorce, or they got a kid who's gone sideways on them, or whatever. Or, hey, did you hear about this really bad flight they had last night? Thankfully, now most of the times I could say yes to that. The others are kind of more traditional. And then what we ask is that the supervisor just say, hey, I want to have peer support give you a call. And I assign somebody to that, and we walk with them through that. Again, even if it's not directly work related, the only difference between a work related incident and a family crisis kind of thing would be where we point them for help. Work related, we would point them to Dr. Glenn. A family kind of thing, we would seek help either in the community or through an EAP program, which may be in the community too. I don't,
Right.
The other thing is that people trust us. We have made confidentiality an absolute hallmark of this. And you all know, as pilots, the last thing you want is a mental health thing on your medical, right?
Right.
Because our friends at the FAA, they have one response to that. And
Yep.
now, granted, they are making some changes. There are some changes on the horizon where peer support is being potentially folded into this. And in Europe, it's been a requirement for several years.
Wow.
So when we look at these things, people can call, people can refer, people can self-refer. Your partner. Hey, who knows you better, in a stress situation than the guy or gal sitting next to you.
Yes,
You know?
absolutely. They know
And
much better than anyone else.
absolutely. And probably sometimes you're better at hiding things from your family than you are from your partner. So anyway, we try to make that as the active side of things. And then on the passive side, there's the comm alert system we already talked about. I also, we have an aviation monitoring system where different incidents, like any unanticipated landing or event, is called what we call an alert 3. And I get notified of those and follow up with the crew. And
Gotcha.
then within the clinical side of things, our compliance person reviews charts. And if she sees one that she knows is a high alert, and she's a former nurse medic, she knows what to look for. And I'll get a call about it, or actually an email that is HIPAA compliant, and then I follow up with the crew. So we try to make the net as comprehensive as we can. Frankly, we still miss a few,
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. So even with this comprehensive system, you still find some misses now and then?
Yeah. I mean, they're not enough to be concerning in terms of system concerning, because they're almost always outliers. And it typically is a mismatch between what dispatch got. It sounded, well, we've all been on those calls, right? You go there thinking this is going to be, I can get back to dinner in no time. And suddenly you're up to your ears in alligators and fighting for your life or somebody else's life. And so there's a mismatch sometimes. And in the aeromedical world, they're not hearing necessarily the hospital report. So they don't always know if things radically changed with the patient. So in our world, that's most of the time that's the structural things that happen that, oh, well, that didn't turn out to be what we thought it was going to be. So
the structural pieces you put in place to catch all those things, or at least the majority of those things, is really interesting. As in law enforcement, and this is public safety across the board, things seem to happen in threes. There's 3 critical incidents seemingly to happen back to back to back all the time. What I noticed happens oftentimes, and this isn't even related to the mental health side of things, but it is part of it, is one of those 3 gets overshadowed by the other 2.
Yep.
And if that one that's overshadowed by those 2 does have a component related to that's mental health related, it gets overlooked and lost in the shuffle. So by having an automated program that says, hey, we need to follow up on all 3 of these things through the ComSpec program or whatever, that's genius. I love that.
Thanks to our sponsor, Traca Systems. With over 25 years delivering groundbreaking searchlights, stabilized EO/IR cameras, mission mapping, and downlinking solutions, Traca products improve situational clarity and coordination with ground crews, increasing mission safety and effectiveness. Visit tracasystems.com. See clearly, act decisively.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we have the advantage of a older program that really is we've pushed hard out into every corner of the organization that we possibly can. So when these things happen, I'm thinking of one that the the dispatch information that that comm center was given was completely different than what the crew on the ground saw. And the crews call me and say, "Hey, you didn't call us. What's wrong?" And well, I don't know. Why? Tell me about the flight, And what we do is we go back and we review those, not in a punitive way at all, but just to see, did we miss something that we should have caught? And how can we not do that potentially the next time? So the cool thing is I get calls probably 2-3 times a month from crews of, "Hey, did you hear about the neighboring flight program's flight?" "Yep, we're on it. Cool." And that brings back confidentiality. I kind of got off on a tangent there, but confidentiality.
Oh, this is great.
Dr. Glenn has 3, and the cool thing. Let me talk about our relationship with her, because since we have a mental health professional, she is she's not our medical director because she's not a doctor, but not a physician, but because of her mental health credentials, we have her umbrella of confidentiality and protection in that. So talking to one of our peer support team members is as though you were talking to her personally, with 3 exceptions. You tell me you're going to kill yourself or kill somebody else, we got to do something about that. Child or elder abuse, we're all reporters, we got to do something about that. And thankfully, I've never had this come up in the whole time I've been doing peer support, but something that is an illegal act that would also get you fired from PHI. Obviously, we got to do something about that. It could be anything from diverting medications to, whatever. So other than those 3 things, it is 100% confidential from the president of the company to the newest employee. I was a base supervisor in Central Texas, and I went on a 2-week, I actually took 2 weeks off once.
You did?
Yeah, imagine that. I don't know how that worked. And apparently one of my nurses had an event, went through the process, saw Dr. Glenn, came back to work, and it wasn't until a sidebar conversation, and I'm on the peer support team. It wasn't until a sidebar conversation I had with her saying, "Hey, it was really cool that Dr. Glenn, she really cleaned this up. Everything was great." It's like, what are you talking about? I didn't know about it, and I would not have been told. We go as far as we don't bill by name, and our travel is confidential. So if you're a base supervisor and I need Billy Bob off the schedule, I call my supervisor calls your supervisor and says Billy Bob needs off the schedule, and we're not going to tell you why.
Yep.
Now, again, we're a small community. Does it mean that John doesn't know that Jack is going to Austin, Texas for some really good barbecue and to go see Dr. Glenn? No, probably not. Yeah. But we're not telling you. And people don't have to tell you. The other thing is it's a 100% voluntary kind of thing. We are not going to tie you up and throw you on an airplane and take you to Austin, Texas, as much as I might like to sometimes. Or it may be appropriate to do. We don't do that. So it is still, and it's interesting when we've pitched it to people. Some people say no, not going to do it. Most of those within 6 months come back and say, I should have listened to you the first time. I'd like to go. I'd like to go. And I don't know, has Tanya talked on the show about her being able to treat pilots in a preventative way instead of a full diagnosis? Has she gone through that with y'all?
A little bit. We've talked about the proactive front loading of dealing with issues. So she has touched on it, yes.
There's a difference in her world between PTSD disorder or disease in PTSS syndrome. And the earlier you deal with it, the less likely it becomes a disease. So prevention care is not something that can ding your license. So we really encourage our pilots early in the process. If something's going on, don't let it get to where she can't legitimately say it's a syndrome and prevention and has to say diagnosis, because if it's diagnosed, then your medical examiner has to know about it.
Right. It's interesting that you say that, because one of the biggest takeaways from the first time we had Tanya Glenn on, that John and I both talked about and felt, was that we both wish we would have heard that 2-hour conversation in the academy, because we both learned so much about how our brains work, how the processing works. The education part of it was so valuable, and that sounds like a lot of what you do, Dave, is that you're out there on, going to the bases and educating and explaining, hey, this is how it works. You're not even talking about a specific incident or person. No. You're just saying, hey, this is how we as humans work, and you're all going to get affected by this. You will all be affected by it in different ways, but you will all be affected by it. So the more you know, the better off you're going to be later. That was like the biggest takeaway from me from Tanya's first visit.
I believe I begin every talk that I give with a quote from a psychiatrist named Remen, and I'll paraphrase it, but basically it is to walk through other people's pain and suffering and think you're not going to be affected is as unrealistic as walking through water and thinking you're not going to get wet.
Wow. Well, that's perfect.
Yeah. So I teach in our academy. I'm actually the second speaker. This is how, I don't want to say important, but it is, we start at the day one of the academy for every new hire, whether you're in our billing office or whether you're going to go fly, a brand new 145 or a fixed wing pilot. We have fixed wing operations too.
Right.
And I get day one with them for about 45 minutes to do just basically a little snippet of this is the process. Expect to hear from me. We're somebody on the team if you're involved in a high stress event. And we kind of set the tone. But again, that we have the luxury of having done this for a while. And it's, again, pushing it out in the organization. That was the hardest thing we did, was getting it in the and gaining trust in the organization that, I'm not going to, Jack comes to me and says, hey, I've got a problem. This flight has really eaten me. And me calling his boss and saying, hey, did you hear about Jack?
Yep.
So it takes a minute. And one of the things I love doing is trying to help our partners out there set up their own peer support teams, because it takes an effort. I mean, and it's a commitment from on high. Yeah. It ain't cheap. In the long run, it's cheaper than hiring new people.
Yes.
But
yes.
Looking at the operational number of it is not inconsequential, but it's about the same as hiring maybe one or two new medics.
Yeah.
And if you lose them, plus think of what does Dr. Grossman say, that do you really want this sleep deprived, stressed person on your team, because they're a PR disaster.
Yeah.
And you just don't want it.
No. You've touched on this a couple times, and I want to, before we get into your background here, I really want you to touch on this again. You've said the word trust multiple times. Talk about, well, let me back up. With trust, I would imagine that took time and you earned it. Talk about earning that trust and how important that trust is for this whole system to work.
Well, it's critical. It is the linchpin. If we violate someone's trust, if we go out and gossip about what's going on with Dave, if we go out and now there are situations where you've got to tell somebody, boss, hey, we need Dave off of the aircraft because he's in crisis or that there's an issue going on. We probably wouldn't say in crisis. But you have to let people know you're going to do that. And that is for their own safety and for the safety of the patient and crew. It took years. And I mean, people were just waiting. Everybody, when you put this new program out, it's another poster, it's another slogan, it's another safety thing that is going to get a bunch of lip service and go away. Well, we started this in 2011. It didn't go away. And it about 4 or 5 years of consistently, we cannot convince you that we are trustworthy. You can't do that. Our actions will convince others who say, maybe you ought to talk to these guys. They help me. And
Wow.
I think that's the word of mouth. And I encourage our folks to just go out and preach the gospel of peer support, that there's nothing quite like success to breed success.
Very interesting. Before we move to your background, John, anything else on this incredible start to this conversation?
Just one thing I thought of, and you brought this up early on, Dave, in the conversation, was the physiological response to stress. It's proven by science that your body does perceive and react to stress in certain ways. Jack and I just yesterday talked about the 4 science studies and how the science is studying how we perceive and respond to threats. And I think the public safety community and law enforcement in particular has gotten really accustomed to understanding that side of the physiological response to something. We haven't really gotten good at understanding the physiological response to the post-stress stuff that you brought up. I think a lot of people still see that post-stress response as, I'll call it a weakness in your character versus a physiological response to something that you're dealing with. So I like that you brought that up, and I think it's an interesting point that we do process things in a way that we can't control, because that's how your system responds as people.
Exactly.
So, interesting conversation for sure.
Thank you to our sponsor, Technisonic Communications. Technisonic Communications is a proud provider of the critical airborne communications equipment utilized every day on every mission. Law enforcement, EMS, forestry, federal and military operators all trust their communications to Technisonic. Visit TIL.ca to learn how Technisonic can support your mission communications.
Well, and when people wrap their brain around the difference between a processed memory and an unprocessed memory, and why our memories process differently in a stress event, is that you're bathed in epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol. And sometimes you're able to process by yourself over the next few days, and sometimes it takes some help to do that because it gets stuck. And the difference between a processed memory and an unprocessed memory is a unprocessed memory will be vivid. You'll remember every sound, every smell, every color, every, pick an event. It's like 5G right there in front of you playing on a continuous loop, or getting triggered every time you play on a continuous loop. And triggers can be anything, they can be anything, and they're unique to the event. Where a processed memory is, it doesn't mean that somehow the memory doesn't suck. It's still awful, but it is in context, and you don't have the same, your amygdala doesn't fire, and you're not right back there standing on the same street corner.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between the two. And sometimes it takes help to process that.
Yeah. And it's all your senses. I mean, it could
Oh
be a
yeah.
smell, it could be vision. You see something and it takes you back to the event that you're struggling with. But because Lord knows there's a lot of smells
Oh yeah.
in the world of public safety that can remind you of all sorts of things, good, bad, and ugly. Just think about, here's an example. You go to qualify with your pistol, something you're required to do. Well, suddenly, what are you smelling? You're smelling that gunpowder. I mean, the smell is potent. Well, you just had an officer involved shooting a few months ago, and maybe it was tragic, or maybe it's something you're really dealing with, and now you just go to qualify, something you do all the time, don't think anything of it, and that smell hits you, and whammo,
absolutely,
you go to a different place. I mean, so important that the education part that you're talking about. If officers and paramedics and firefighters, if they're all thinking about this ahead of time, going, hey, just so you know, this is how it works. You're not abnormal. That's the way it works. That's important for you to for all of us to understand. So you don't feel like you're, oh man, what happened there? Oh, I know what happened. I smelled the gunpowder and that took me back to this. I mean, making that connection seems to be very important.
I had one 3 years ago in this very house in the basement. We bought a house when we moved out here to Utah that needed a bunch of renovation. And I'm sitting in the basement, actually working on this computer. And suddenly I'm at 7th and Broadway in Louisville, Kentucky. It's my 3rd or 4th day on the job, right in front of the White Castle, if you've ever been to 7th and Broadway in Louisville. And I am the expendable crewman, so to speak, because I'm the new guy. I'm literally the 3rd day on the job. They stuffed me in the back of an ambulance to help the people who actually knew what they were doing to take care of somebody. And I'm stuffing Curlex in this guy's neck who had his throat slashed in a dice game gone bad. Oh. And again, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is years before gloves. So my hands are covered in blood. I'm covered in blood because his airway is open. It's spraying everywhere. And it's like, what the heck just happened? That is a 45-year plus memory. You know what it was? There was a guy upstairs, right over there, over my shoulder, not here at Zion, but if you could see my bedroom, in that bathroom, soldering copper, the water line. And what does hot copper smell like? A paramedic bloodbath.
Oh, wow.
So, and I'd add that, I mean, I'm kind of a Jake Lake plumber, so I've soldered a bunch of copper in 40-something years. It wasn't, I was in a little puddle, oh my goodness, I'm having this horrible PTSD flashback. Yeah. It certainly was a flashback, but it was, oh my, and I could see the blood on my hands.
Incredible. 45 years.
Yeah.
And a smell triggers you it takes you back and you can see that scene vividly.
Yeah.
It's interesting, both of these things you brought up, Jack. Just last week we were walking in the Coast Guard hangar, and the moment we walked in there, I'm like, this smell sounds so familiar, or smells familiar. And I think I even brought it up to you. I'm like, what does that smell like?
Yeah.
It smells like carbon. And I think the reason it struck me is because you talk about going to the range to shoot. When you go to the range, you expect to smell carbon. When you're in an officer-involved shooting, you're in an environment where you don't expect to smell carbon. So that's the smell that really sticks out in that, at least to me, associating me with that incident. So when we walked in that hangar and I smelled carbon in a place I didn't expect to smell carbon, it brought me back to what you're talking about, Dave. So I wonder if, similar to what you experience when you're soldering something, you're expecting to smell that smell. But when you're kind of caught off guard in a situation where you're not really expecting to smell it, it takes you back. Really interesting. The science behind this, the conversation surrounding this is so interesting.
Not to belabor it, but we had a incident in our organization a few years ago where, and I need to make sure I do this without uncovering a confidentiality, but a pilot did a very nice thing for a crew, moved a stretcher, and it was a horrific pediatric injury. he thought he was fine. And about a month later, he called me and said, Dave, I'm not fine. And I said, well, so what's going on? And any Texans in the audience will understand this, but he was at HEB, which is beloved to everybody in Texas, the grocery store that everybody loves. And he says, it was those darn Elsa socks. And I said, Elsa socks? My kids are grown. I don't know that that's part of Frozen. And the kid who was injured had the same socks on as the kid in the grocery cart in front of him.
Oh, wow.
He said he had to leave. And he went through care with Dr. Glenn and everything was fine. But you're right. I mean, and that's the thing we don't prepare people in this business of. It can be anything. How many times have you driven through where you were a police officer and think, I'm sure your families are like mine. They don't want to hear the commentary of what you did on every street corner. At least mine don't anymore. That's one reason. That's a plus of moving away from Austin.
Yeah. Yeah. Because after a while, you were there so long.
Oh, yeah.
You do have a story for every street corner.
Yeah.
And that's a big city. That's very true. I try to avoid most of the neighborhoods I ever worked in. John, how about you?
Yeah, I try not to spend too much time there.
But sometimes it's unavoidable. See, for cops, it's a little different because we're in specific spots within the city, whereas you were everywhere. You know, you're all over the place. So you have an every corner story. But if I go back to like 77th Street, which I have never done since leaving there, 77th Street Division, I have a story for every street corner. I mean, every cop does, you know, I remember this, remember that.
Oh, yeah. And
some remember it better than others, but you just do. It brings you back. It's just, our brains are very powerful and complicated and can do more than we think we understand. But
amen.
Wow. So what a first almost hour here, Dave. Unbelievable. Thank you so much.
It does feel like that.
that was great. So let's learn for us and for our audience. Let's learn more about you and how you ended up here. I mean, you've have a lot of time in this, but you had an event when you were 7.
I did.
That jumped out. Tell us about that event at age 7 and how that influenced your path. Not directly. You took a couple weaves and dodges and weaves, but eventually that event came back. Tell us about that event and then talk about your career.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a little town in Kentucky called Alexandria, Kentucky. At the time, probably 800-900 people. My dad was a volunteer firefighter, and this is well before radios or pagers or anything like this. Is probably 1960-ish. I say, 62. And I was with him, and we were going to, I think, if I recall, maybe the Western Auto of all things, when there was still such a thing.
Yeah.
And the way that they dispatched the fire guys, the life squadmen, was the fire siren, and they had this thing that sounded like an air raid siren that you could hear anywhere in the city, and it went off, and he was on squad duty that day, and there wasn't time to leave a 7-year-old sitting at the fire station, so they had this old converted bench seat. What was it? It was an international travelall that they had built out to an ambulance. And so my first ambulance call, I was 7 and I remember standing up. Now, this is how safety has changed.
Just a little, huh?
Yeah, just a little. Standing up on the bench seat of an ambulance running code through town to pick up a guy with a stroke. Yeah, I got hooked early.
Yeah.
But honestly, then I didn't join the fire department. I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Decided I was going to do television production. I have a bachelor's degree in mass communications, and I was going to do television production, the technical side of things, not the talent side. And my last semester-ish in school, I decided I needed an easy 3-hour health elective. And I thought, well, everybody needs a good first aid course. And I took the EMT and got hooked. Graduated and then couldn't find a job in television, but could easily find a job as an EMT with the city of Louisville, Kentucky. I was at Western Kentucky University at the time, and then we moved to Louisville and I really thought I'd just do that for 18 months, 2 years until I found a job in television and never turned around. Went through the second paramedic class in Kentucky, and my number is 158, which actually is 58 because they started numbering at 100. So I'm pretty proud of that.
Let's pause there. That's the 58th paramedic for the city when the program started, right?
For the state of Kentucky.
Or for the state. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I've been a paramedic since then. Still a medic in Texas. Probably not going to let that go until I really can't, just out of pride.
Yeah.
And then stayed with Louisville a few years, bounced around the Midwest doing education programs, and then landed in Austin in '88. Was deputy director for a bit, and then director for a 5-year stint, and then moved out of that back into a more line role. And along the way, took advantage of a neat program that they had. I hope they still have it. I don't know. Where you can do a bridge. It's called a paramedic to nurse bridge. Because I was looking at retiring from the city, or taking my retirement as soon as I could from the city. Never heard that in public safety, have you?
No, I never heard that before.
No.
It's a first, right?
Yeah.
First here on the Hangar Z podcast.
There you go. Anyway, went for a year to junior college and got my RN and worked in ERs for a little bit, and flying job came along, and almost 25 years ago started flying. I always wanted to. The aviation side of it always fascinated me. I'm not talking to pilots here. I know that I have to caveat that. I do not pretend to know I know how to fly a helicopter, okay? But it's always fascinated me. And I was one of those, I was never a trunk monkey. I was never somebody who just wanted to get in and be quiet. And so I would be the guy that would pester you about why you're doing this, or tell me about what this VOR means, or what that, or, did you hear that on the radio, or what, but I wouldn't touch stuff because I know I'd get backhanded. And most of my time was in a 135, so you could fly up front. So that was kind of the lure to me. I've always been interested in it. So that was kind of what attracted me to the aviation side of medicine, and the fact that you get super sick people.
Yeah.
It's an amazing blend, not just doing scene responses, but going to these super sick patients in the hospital. And what we try to do is to bring the ICU to this tiny community hospital, that has 35 beds. And take these really complex, sick patients out of there to a big teaching hospital.
Yeah. So because we have a lot of people that listen and watch outside of public safety, some might not understand why you just said that. I understand. John understands. Most of our listeners do. When you said, well, I wanted to go there because you get the really sick people. So talk about that statement and why you said that. I mean, was it the challenge? Was it that it tests your skills? I mean, those people are going to be there either way, but you wanted to be involved in that. Talk about that a little bit more so people really understand your point of view in that.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers.
Thanks to our sponsor, Traca Systems. With over 25 years delivering groundbreaking searchlights, stabilized EOIR cameras, mission mapping, and downlinking solutions, Traca products improve situational clarity and coordination with ground crews, increasing mission safety and effectiveness. Visit trackassystems.com. See clearly, act decisively.
Thank you to our sponsor, Rotorcraft Support. Rotorcraft Support, from the hangar floor to the flight line. We've spent 40 years caring for the aircraft that communities rely on every day. Rotorcraft Support, where dedication meets decades of experience.
Thank you to our sponsor, Technisonic Communications. Technisonic Communications is a proud provider of the critical airborne communications equipment utilized every day on every mission. Law enforcement, EMS, forestry, federal and military operators all trust their communications to Technisonic. Visit TIL.ca to learn how Technisonic can support your mission communications.
Thank you for joining us on the Hangar Z podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dave Wuertz of PHI Air Medical. Dave's life of service is truly remarkable. His contributions in mental wellness and peer support have had a great deal of positive impact on the air medical community. We salute his tireless efforts in making peer support a priority at PHI Air Medical. Thank you for sharing your story and experience for all of us, Dave. We really appreciate it. This information crosses all bounds, and it's just as good for law enforcement, air medical, firefighting, and beyond. We hope you really got something out of this. We sure did. Stay safe, and we'll catch you the next time on the Hangar Z podcast.